In fact, if you go to the mental health practitioner often today and you tell them that you are a follower of God, they will immediately diagnose you and require therapy to get rid of that idea. We have had a paradigm shift that has affected everybody's mental health. A paradigm shift of any nature requires, in a given culture, a responsible and intelligent people to evaluate its cause and what its long-term effects will be. The Bible and mental health. I'm going to back up slightly. We're in the middle of a series, and we have covered the first two foundations of what the Bible teaches about the foundations for mental health, and we're going to do number 3 today, and we will get to the fourth one, which will be really where it all comes together. But I'd like to talk for a moment about the cultural condition of mental health in our culture in which we live. And I want you to grasp, if you would with me, a couple of vital bits of information. Number one, cultures experience shifts in paradigms. Cultures experience shift. Things change in a culture. It doesn't stay the same forever. And a paradigm, by the way, is simply a pattern, a standard, a way of being, and something comes along and changes that paradigm, that pattern, that standard, the way it was, to take it into something new. So cultures experience shifts in paradigm. Now, paradigm shifts for all those living in the culture require evaluation. What is causing this paradigm shift, and what are the effects of the paradigm shift? How does it affect us personally? Let me give you an example of this. We had a paradigm shift in our culture. It began in 1969, really happened officially in 1970. It was the introduction of what's called no-fault divorce. By the way, the first legal binding contract that now requires no penalty, no terms of conclusion. An amazing, staggering event took place. That was in 1970. And now the courts ruled that you could desert your wife and children, or vice versa. The wife could desert without any consequence, without any judgment, without any adjudication. And they base it on this one premise that every person has a right to be happy, even if it makes a whole lot of other people unhappy. And that began a new change. It was further agitated and aggravated in 1973 with the Roe versus Wade, where now we can kill babies in the first trimester. And what has happened as a consequence of these movements, this shift in our culture, is a new paradigm. Let me tell you about the new paradigm. Today, there is a divorce every 36 seconds in America. That is 2,400 every single day. That is 16,800 every week. That is 826,000 every year. That is a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift is a shift of family. So marriage broke down and families broken down, and now, these few years later, 42% of children in America are raised without a physical father present. What a paradigm shift since 1970, 47 years ago. So now, marriage as an institute, and now start to add that, the same same-gender coupling, etc. And you've got a paradigm shift that's happened in America in the last 40 years that has moved us from family responsibility, family orientation, marital covenant has been virtually destroyed. You know, the first official divorce in America was in the 1800s. And it required, are you ready? An act of Congress to get it. And now here we are these years later. This paradigm shift has brought great damage to the culture. Now watch this, because this is our point. That paradigm shifts require us to evaluate them as to what their causes were and what are the effects on us. So I want you to notice a couple of scriptures that warn us not to enter into the path, the paradigm shift of the wicked. Go not in the way of evil men. There are paradigm shifts that are evil and somewhat disguised, sneak up on us and get into our culture, and the danger is that they are not evaluated by us. In fact, in the divorce situation, the George Barna organization reports 29% of Baptists are divorced, 21% of atheists. Now, don't get down on the Baptists because they're just a symptom of all the rest of us as well. How does this happen? It's not that they were particularly bad people, but the paradigm shift has so infiltrated the church system that we have become a byproduct of those cultural changes. Right? Let's look at another scripture. That you might walk in the way of good men. Oh. And keep the paths of the righteous. A paradigm shift of any nature requires, in a given culture, a responsible and intelligent people to evaluate its cause and what its long-term effects will be. In fact, personal well-being is always affected either positively or negatively by the paradigm shifts. So if it was just sort of happening out there in the culture and didn't affect us, it would be bad enough. But our personal well-being is always affected either positively or negatively by the paradigm shifts. Check the scripture. Thorns and snares are in the way. They're on the path of the froward. He that, look at this now, doth keep his soul shall be far from them. Obviously, your soul is your thinking, your mind, your feelings, your behaviors, okay? So they affect us personally either one way or the other, and that's why they must be evaluated. And the way of righteousness is life, and the path thereof there is no death. Isn't that great? And then we need to understand that our response to cultural shifts after analysis it needs to be proactive, and we have to do something about it. So let's take a look at the scriptures that affirm this. Be not conformed to the world. Let me just put it in our application. Let's not be conformed to an evil cultural shift. Let us not buy into the new paradigm, but instead, now watch this, be transformed by the renewing of, now watch this, because it's about the mind, and that's what we're coming to in a moment. It's about the mind. Watch now. So here is a translation. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Don't become so well adjusted to the culture so that you fit into it without even thinking. Don't copy the behavior and customs of the world. Another translation. So let's go back here for a moment. Don't be conformed to the world. Don't be conformed to the paradigm shift if it's evil. But be transformed, and this transformation has to do with the mental processes. Okay? That you may prove what is this good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So we must be proactive in our response. Now, this brings us to our subject of the day. We must understand the paradigm shifts, the shift that now affects the culture condition of our mental health. It's time for an evaluation. Has a paradigm shift taken place? What are its causes and what are its effects? How does that damage me potentially, and what should I do about it? We need to prove what's right about this mental health condition. And so this is why our subject today is exactly what it is. But before we go to it, let's talk about the impact of the mental health industry on our culture as it is right now. Because my contention with any who wish to observe is that we have had a paradigm shift that has affected everybody's mental health. That is why 46.8 million Americans were diagnosed last year with mental illness of some sort or another. This is why the numbers are growing so rapidly, and in fact, we're now at the place where they tell me that 22% of American people are mentally ill in some way or another. How did this happen? And I want to suggest to you that the paradigm shift in mental health has been caused by the mental health industry, and here are the 8 reasons why. The mental health industry basically believes in what's called naturalism, which means that life can be explained by natural processes, requiring no such thing as a creator. This is devastating, as you can well imagine. And then materialism. The health industry has bought into the idea that everything consists of matter and energy. God is irrelevant, and there is no such thing as a spiritual dimension to mankind. In fact, if you go to the mental health practitioner often today and you tell them that you are a follower of God, they will immediately diagnose you and require therapy to get rid of that idea. Because they believe in naturalism and materialism, and then reductionism is another core issue with the mental health industry. They believe that human behavior can be explained by physiological, biological, and chemical processes. That's where the whole chemical thing starts to play into this. That in fact, human behavior is reduced and can be explained chemically, physiologically, and biologically. Determinism. They have bought into the notion that human behavior is determined by some natural processes and rejects the whole idea of human freedom and personal responsibility for behavior. Something is determining the behavior. Something is making me do some chemical, biological process, some environmental element, some hereditary element. And they all play this game of that you are the product and you are determined by things beyond your control. And then they have bought into the idea of evolution, which is an explanation for the existence of life and the human personality that bypasses the whole idea of there being a creator whatsoever. And then empiricism. It's simply by that they mean that when it comes to empirical evidence, it is only known scientifically through the senses. If you can't see it, it doesn't exist. You can't touch it. You can't hear it. And so they deny things that are, to them, undetectable by scientific instrument, and has become their criteria of adjudication when it comes to the facts of life. And then relativism. They believe there are no absolutes. There are no standards such as right and wrong, because that could cause you guilt, and guilt could cause you depression, and on they'll go. So there are no absolutes in the mental health industry. No standards of right or wrong. Each is free to choose his or her own moral views. Now understand that let me give you the eighth one here. Well, let's finish up number 7. Because this is a biblically defined condition, by the way, that every man does what's right in his own eyes. Everybody sets their own value. I have my own standards. I don't care what God says or what's true. And this is a part of relativism, the philosophy of the health industry. In fact, the way of the fool is right in his own eyes. He thinks he's right. But the scripture defines, in fact, what he really is. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Hear the Lord, depart from evil. So relativism reinforces this notion that without absolutes, you're free to set your own moral compass in any direction that you please. And then at the core, at the root of this is humanism, that man is in fact God unto himself and is free to do whatever he pleases. And thus, in the mental health industry, the promotion of the id, the ego, the superego, the self, becomes the exalted purpose of therapy. How do we get the self happy? So this is how the mental health industry has impacted our culture already over the years. And as a consequence, we come now to the ultimate issue, I think, between the mental health industry and its anti-God position. And it's because that at this level, this paradigm, this cultural shift is so radical and such a movement that it affects the very foundation of our culture, of our nation, of our politic, of everything. And we haven't even talked about the other paradigm shifts that are happening right now. Which is an amazing paradigm shift going on right now. Now, the shift is just a shift at the moment. How far something shifts is quite another matter. I cited to you moments ago about the family paradigm, the new paradigm, the destruction of marriage and family. That's a paradigm shift that's gone a long way. I want to tell you, too, in a moment, that the mental health industry has created a great paradigm shift. But there's another shift going on, and that it's a nationalism shift from pro-American to anti-American. It's from pro-honesty and reporting to pretend news, and the propaganda wars are now raging to the point where we are in theoretically, we are facing the possibilities of a civil upset of major proportion. So now comes the Bible and says this, that if there are foundational elements, that if a paradigm shift happens and it changes the foundation, the trouble is going to be great. It will be the destruction. Remember, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin, that's allowed, is a reproach to any people. But if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do about it? Scripture comes along and says, they don't know. They don't understand. They do not know. They do not understand. They walk on in darkness, and the foundations of the earth get put out of course because of this paradigm shift. Now, here is the biblical response for us of what we should do upon observation and analysis of a paradigm shift that's taking place in mental health. Thus saith the Lord. Here's what he says. Take a look. Stand in the ways. Look at it. Look. See what's going on. And ask for the old paths. And watch this now, because in that is the actual good way, right? And walk in them, no matter which way the culture is going. Oh, I have no idea what happened there. And walk in them. Now watch this. And you shall find rest for your soul. You will find rest for your mind. So I'm purporting to you the drastic need for us to analyze the paradigm shift in mental health that's affected our culture, evaluate it, and change it for our own mental health's sake.